My name is Bray Beltrán, and I am the science director for Heart of the Rockies Initiative, which is a land trust partnership working to increase the pace of private land conservation in the Intermountain West, in the Rocky Mountains, in the northern US and southern portion of Canada. My role is to guide science or produce science that informs private land protection and what are the best places to invest in private land protection so we can have working land, farms and ranches that also provide wildlife connectivity or wildlife habitat. So finding that intersection of working and community well-being, but also of what we normally think of environmental benefit or protecting the environment. I think when I was within academia and getting a PhD, I think my identity affected my ability to get that PhD because my lived experience took me to a place where I saw that the work that I needed to do was to use science to answer questions that were relevant and that improved the well-being of the people around the communities where I either lived or grew up or was going to live. And that's how I saw my career unfolding. Unfortunately, the committee that I had for that PhD program did not consider those type of questions to be PhD level questions. So no, I failed out of PhD out of my PhD program, and but that was one of the that to me was the main point, and I spoke to this at NACB last year. It's like, yes, I didn't pass my comps, and I should not have passed those comps. I was not ready for them, but I was not ready because I wasn't motivated to study in a way that was to just advance the field and not have an impact. And there was that difference between how I saw a PhD and my career developing and what my committee saw. And I feel like that's where my identity as a person that comes from a place where people are using those natural resources very, very closely to be able to survive and for their well-being, right? It's like, it's fish, it's firewood, it's those things. Like, I need to be able to understand how they're using those systems and how can we use those systems better so they can have well-being in the long term. And those type of questions weren't deemed good enough for a PhD. So when I did not pass my exam, I didn't even get invited to take a second exam. So I feel like my identity really affected my ability to get a PhD, which in hindsight, I'm like, I already had the tools and I'm really happy where I am. I did not need a PhD to be able to do what I really wanted to do in my career, which is something that we need to understand. But PhDs are pretty much the way that we see as like, if I want to be a researcher, I need this type of degree. And if we don't, we might not even be considered real researchers or real scientists. So I feel like, you know, I don't need the degree to be able to do what I need to do, but at the same time, I see how my identity and my background affected my, if you were to call it, progress in the academic world, because of the way that I was seeing the world given my lived experience. Not yet. and I say not yet because I work in private land protection, and 98% of the private land in the United States is owned by white people. And here I am trying to affect change in whichever way I can within the practice of private land protection. And in the private land system, which is an inherently white colonial system. And I am not sure how much longer I'm going to be welcome in the movement, and how much push I can have in the private land protection movement, and on how we deal with private land as a system. So it's it's an army of one. It's not just me, but it's like my practice is me, and it has a lot of effect on me. So the question is, does a person of color have a place in the part of the conservation movement that is ultimately perpetuating white land ownership? When that white land ownership was obtained through land dispossession. And if I do, it is because I feel like it is because I am asking some questions that can help our movement be more just equitable and inclusive. But how much can I push against that, against the current and the system, until I am that thorn on the side that people don't want to work with? And that is a fear and a question that I wake up with every day, and that I do not know if I continue the path of questioning land ownership and the practices of private land protection, if there's space for me in the movement for much longer. I hope it is. I hope I'm making a contribution, but I do not know the answer to that question. Yeah, actually, and this is very interesting because it has to do with race, but it was in a lab where we were all non-white, non-American. And it was a lab where the PI, it's an international PI in the United States, and the group that he had was all from the same country that he was, and I was brought in also as an international student, but I was not part of that culture, and I was treated differently, even though but this is different in the sense that it wasn't whiteness and people of color. It was more of colorism, but I'm not sure that professor was even aware of what he was doing. I don't know. When I left that lab, I had a senior faculty member of that school ask me, do you think there was a racial component to your experience and what you're living? And I felt like that was the case, but I didn't feel empowered. I didn't have enough understanding of racism and colorism at the time, even though I know that I was feeling it. But I also didn't feel empowered enough that even though there was a senior faculty trying to ask these questions to maybe make it better for me or make it better for the next student, that I could speak candidly about that. So I just said, I don't think so. But yeah, and I think it's my experience is valuable in the sense that we need to make sure that yes, there is white supremacy and there is there's colonialism, but there's also colorism. And a lot of the time, because we concentrate on our own identity, we fail to uplift everybody that is being oppressed by the same system. And we need to keep that in mind. It's not just about whiteness as a system, or it is about whiteness as a system, not about particular white people or doing the wrong. It could be perpetuated by anybody. It didn't happen in public, but it was an email conversation that I was having with a colleague um, pretty recently, where this colleague asked me, like, "Hey, I get asked to give seminars or talks at universities in a regular basis. Might you be interested in something like that? And um, can I give your name as a contact if I see that you're a good fit or whatever?" I said, "Sure, but I know you're aware of this, but please make sure that the people that you're giving my name know that I don't have a PhD. Because if I'm going to be talking to an academic audience, I wanna make sure that they know from the beginning that I don't have a PhD. And because it is my experience that if you don't have a PhD, you might not be considered an authority, or that your point of view is not as valid as somebody with a PhD." This person said at the time in the conversation was, "I don't think that's relevant, and I would stop that in its tracks so hard and let anybody know that that is not the case. That it is having or not having a PhD basically is not the way that your input and observations and knowledge should be judged." And I know that my colleague would do that. Um, she would use all of her privilege to do that, and knowing that even as a woman in science, she may have even more pushback than as a man in science. But that in that case, it was this ally reassuring me that me not being able to get a PhD was not a failure, and that my voice still counts and my experience still counts within the conservation movement. That was very powerful and much appreciated. So, and just something else there. And this was a private moment, right? It didn't need to be in public, but just if you're an ally, and sometimes, you don't know if you can do that in public because whatever your intersections, make sure that if you really feel it, those private moments can be just as valuable and as powerful and as empowering for anybody that might need that support. That you might see that might need that support.